If I had been given the chance to buy a quantum stock in 2023 when it was trading for less than $1, I would have had to ask myself a very simple but very difficult question. Was I looking at a real signal, or was I looking at just another speculative story? That is the kind of question that separates investing from excitement. Because if you had bought that kind of stock when nobody was paying attention, before the headlines, before the Nvidia announcements, before the phrase quantum computing started spreading across financial media, the result would have been extraordinary. A $10,000 position at that moment could have become more than $200,000, but I do not look at a result like that as a reason to celebrate. I look at it as evidence of a process. There is a phrase I like for this. It is a woodshed signal. A person can walk onto a stage and play a guitar, and for a few moments the crowd may be impressed. But if that person has spent years practicing where nobody could see it, the performance reveals the preparation. The result carries the evidence of the work that came before it. That is what a good investment call sometimes is. Anyone can become excited about quantum computing after the stocks have already moved and the world has already noticed. Anyone can say that a sector is important after the headlines become obvious. But seeing a sector early when the companies are small, misunderstood, ignored, and still deeply uncertain, that is different. That is the woodshed. That is the work before the applause. And now we are at a very important stage in this cycle, because the question is no longer whether quantum stocks can move. We have already seen that they can. The question is whether the opportunity is still early enough to justify the risk, and whether the investor making the decision is operating from a framework or from emotion. That is the distinction I care about 6 months ago. The investable quantum universe was much narrower. There were only a few publicly traded pure plays. Today, the list has expanded. There are more public companies, there are more architectures represented, there are more IPOs in the pipeline. The sector is becoming more real, more visible, and more dangerous at the same time. That is how these cycles work. In the beginning, the opportunity is hidden because almost nobody is looking. Then the opportunity becomes visible because the first winners appear. Then the opportunity becomes crowded because people who missed the first move begin chasing the second one. A good investor has to know where he is in that sequence before looking at any single company. I want to make the basic principle clear. Quantum computing is not one technology moving down one road. It is a field with multiple competing architectures that matters, because if you think quantum is just one bet, you will size it incorrectly. If you understand that there are different paths with different probabilities, different timelines, and different failure modes, then you can think about it with more balance. There is a rule from mathematics called the 37% rule in simple terms. It says that before making a major decision, you should spend the first part of the process observing. You learn what good looks like, you build a baseline, you resist the urge to commit too early. Then, when you see something better than what you have already observed, you have a reason to move. I think that idea is very useful here. Most people do not observe first. They react first, they see a chart, they see a stock up 400%. They hear a story, they feel left behind, then they buy. That is not a process, that is emotion wearing the clothing of conviction. With quantum, the observation phase matters because the sector is still young. The companies are still burning capital, and the difference between a real commercial signal and a promotional announcement can be enormous. So let us look at the field the way I would look at any emerging technology cycle. There are 4 major ways to build a quantum computer, and for the first time, all 4 are becoming investable in the public markets. That is the change. You are no longer forced to bet on one architecture. You can now compare approaches. You can look at revenue, backlog, cash burn, customers, acquisitions, manufacturing control, software adoption, and institutional support. You can begin to build a map. The first company in that map is D-Wave. Quantum D-Wave became the poster child for what can happen when a small quantum stock suddenly becomes recognized. It uses a superconducting approach called annealing. What that means in practice is that its systems are designed for optimization problems that exist today. Supply chains, scheduling, drug discovery, financial risk modeling. These are not abstract philosophical applications. They are problems where better optimization can create real value. That distinction matters. Many quantum companies are selling a future D-Wave has customers using its technology now. That does not remove the risk, but it changes the kind of risk. It means the question becomes less about whether anyone will ever use this and more about whether the usage can scale into a durable business. Full year 2025 revenue grew strongly, but the part that matters more is what happened early in 2026. In January and February alone, D-Wave booked more in new contracts than its entire 2025 annual revenue. That is not a small detail when a young technology company starts booking contracts faster than its prior annual revenue base. It can signal a change in adoption. It does not guarantee success, but it tells you that the market may be moving from curiosity toward deployment. There is another detail that is important. In January 2026, D-Wave completed an acquisition that gave it a second quantum architecture. It now has gate model capability in addition to annealing. The numbers are still early, with a small operational qubit base and a roadmap to expand, but strategically it matters because the company is no longer only one kind of quantum bet. It is trying to broaden its architecture exposure. That is the kind of move I pay attention to. not because it guarantees a winner, but because it tells you management understands that the sector is not settled yet. Then there is IonQ. IonQ uses a completely different method called trapped ion, instead of superconducting circuits. Trapped ion systems use individual atoms held in place by electromagnetic fields. These systems are known for precision. And in a field where error rates matter deeply, precision is not a marketing phrase. It is one of the core problems. IonQ is the largest quantum pure play by revenue and market capitalization. When I see that, I do not automatically assume it is the best investment. Size can create strength, but it can also create expectations. The larger a speculative company becomes, the more future success is already priced in. Still, the operating progress is meaningful. When IonQ was covered in late 2025, its backlog was about $77 million. Now it is nearly 5 times that. Revenue tripled year over year. The company also announced a $1.8 billion acquisition of Skywater Technology, a trusted United States semiconductor foundry. That is more than a financial transaction. It is a strategic move. If the acquisition closes, IonQ would control much more of its manufacturing process inside the United States. In a normal technology cycle, that might be useful. In a quantum cycle with defense applications, government contracts, national security concerns, and supply chain sensitivity, it may be more than useful. It may become a requirement. When a company wants to compete for Pentagon quantum work, domestic manufacturing and trusted supply chains matter. This is how I think about it. A technology does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a political and strategic environment. Quantum computing is not just a commercial technology. It is a national security technology. It is a cybersecurity technology. It is an industrial technology. Therefore, the companies that can align technology, manufacturing, and government trust may have an advantage. That does not mean IonQ is cheap. It does not mean it is safe. It means the strategic position is worth observing carefully. The next established company is Rigetti Computing. Rigetti uses superconducting gate model technology. This is a different form of superconducting quantum computing than D-Wave. As annealing approach with Rigetti, the issue I focus on is concentration risk. 2 contracts represent a large portion of its 2026 revenue estimate. One involves India SCDEC Research Organization for a 108-qubit system, and another involves Novara QPU hardware. The delivery timelines have already shifted from the first half to the second half of 2026. That does not automatically mean something is broken. Quantum hardware timelines often slip. Hardware is hard. Cutting-edge hardware is even harder. But when a young company has a concentrated revenue base and key timelines move, you have to respect the risk. If you own Rigetti, you are not simply owning quantum excitement. You are owning an execution thesis. You are betting that its superconducting roadmap can close enough of the gap with the larger players, including IBM and Google, to create a durable place in the ecosystem. That is a very different bet from buying a broad index fund. It can work, but you have to understand what you are actually betting on. Then there is Quantum Computing Inc.'s symbol cut, which many people call Qubit. This is the name where caution becomes especially important. The company's 2025 revenue was only $682,000. Its filing carried a serious warning. It has also faced securities fraud lawsuits and allegations from short sellers, including claims that the company overstated certain relationships and that some revenue was not what investors believed it was. Those are serious issues. In a speculative sector, people often want to ignore uncomfortable facts because the upside story is exciting. But that is exactly how investors get hurt. If a company has tiny revenue, legal risk, going concern risk, and credibility questions, the possible upside does not erase the need for caution. In my framework, this becomes one of the highest risk names in the group. That does not mean it cannot rise. Very risky stocks can rise a lot, but rising is not the same as being sound. A stock can go up for reasons that have nothing to do with durability. Momentum can pull people in, narrative can pull people in, short squeezes can pull people in. The real question is whether the decision is calibrated. With a company like this, if someone chooses to participate, the sizing must reflect the risk. And for many investors, the right size may be 0. That covers several of the more established public names. But the important change is that new entrants have begun to bring other architectures into the public markets. The first of these is Inflection, which came public in February 2026 and uses a neutral atom architecture. Neutral atom systems have a scaling advantage. They may be able to reach very large qubit counts without the same engineering difficulties that some other approaches face. That makes the architecture important, but architecture alone is not enough. A beautiful technical idea does not automatically become a great investment. You need backing, you need commercial traction, you need a reason to believe the company can survive long enough to reach the point where the technology matters. Inflection has one of the strongest institutional profiles among the newer public quantum entrants. NVIDIA selected it for 2 separate quantum programs. I do not treat every partnership announcement as meaningful. Many young technology companies issue press releases that sound important but contain very little substance. The difference here is that NVIDIA selected the company twice out of a wide field of quantum companies that does not guarantee success, but it is not meaningless. Inflection also has two revenue streams, which is important. It has quantum computing and quantum sensing. The sensing side already has deployed hardware, including systems on the International Space Station for NASA. Revenue exceeded $32 million last year, with growth guided for the current year. For a quantum company that has only recently become public, that is real traction, it is still early. The valuation may move ahead of the fundamentals, the technology path may take time, but when I compare new entrants, a company with NVIDIA program selection, dual revenue streams, and deployed sensing hardware deserves close observation. Then there is Xanadu. Xanadu brings the fourth architecture into the public market, photonic quantum computing. This means it uses photons. One major advantage is that its Aurora system operates at room temperature because photons do not require the same cooling infrastructure as superconducting qubits. That can be a real engineering advantage, but with Xanadu, the part that interests me most is not only the hardware, it is the software. Xanadu built an open-source quantum programming framework called Penelane. It is widely used by quantum developers. It has a large number of monthly downloads, and usage grew rapidly last year. That matters, because software adoption can become a kind of platform advantage. Hardware architectures may compete for years. Some will win, some will lose, some will merge. Some will disappear, but a software layer that works across architectures can benefit from the development of the whole field. That makes Xanadu unusual. It gives you two investment cases in one company. One is the photonic hardware bet, the other is the software platform bet. The hardware is speculative, revenue is still early. The stock has been volatile since launch, but the software layer gives it a dimension that many hardware-only pure plays do not have. In emerging technology investing, I like companies that can win in more than one way. That does not make them safe. It simply means the probability tree is broader. Then there is Horizon Quantum. Horizon builds hardware, agnostic quantum software tools. That means it is not trying to win by proving one hardware architecture is the final answer. It is building a middleware layer that can sit across the ecosystem in a sector with uncertain hardware winners. That kind of positioning can be attractive if multiple architectures continue developing. The need for tools that allow developers and enterprises to work across them could increase. But again, early software companies in emerging fields can be difficult to value. The market may give them credit before revenue justifies it, or it may ignore them until adoption becomes obvious. That is why the framework matters more than the excitement. There are also microcap names in quantum security. One is CLSQ, which builds post-quantum encryption chips designed to protect systems before quantum computers become powerful enough to threaten today. S-encryption. Another is Archit, which works on quantum-safe key distribution. These are extremely early. Some are pre-revenue, some are closer to research stage than operating stage businesses, but they round out the investable universe because quantum is not only about computing speed, it is also about security. If quantum computing eventually breaks widely used encryption methods, the companies that protect against that threat may matter, but the timing is uncertain. The market often prices the fear before the revenue arrives. That can create upside, but it can also create dilution and disappointment. Now, beyond the companies already public, there is a pipeline that could reshape the sector further. Quantinuum, majority owned by Honeywell, has confidentially filed for an IPO and is targeting a very large valuation. If it goes public, it could become the largest quantum company in the public markets by far. IQM from Finland is expected to go public through a SPAC structure. Pasquale from France is targeting a listing as well. If these come through, then by the end of 2026, there may be 8 or more publicly traded quantum pure plays, spread across superconducting trapped ion, neutral atom, and photonic architectures. That has not happened before. And when a sector moves from a few isolated stocks into a broader public universe, portfolio construction changes. You no longer need to ask only which single stock is the quantum winner. You can begin asking, how do I build exposure across the quantum stack while controlling the risk that any one company fails? That is a much better question, but there is another layer I think investors must understand before getting too attached to the pure plays. The infrastructure companies may be the most important part of the whole ecosystem. Amazon Web Services hosts multiple quantum hardware providers on a single cloud platform. Microsoft Azure hosts quantum providers as well. NVIDIA's software platform integrates with a large portion of the world's quantum processors, and NVIDIA's venture arm has backed major companies in the field. These companies do not need quantum to succeed. That is the power. They already have large, profitable businesses. They already generate cash. They already have customer relationships, cloud distribution, developer ecosystems, and infrastructure. If quantum succeeds, they become toll collectors. If one quantum architecture beats another, the infrastructure companies may still earn from the activity around it. That is why, in a speculative sector, I often prefer the picks and shovels over the miners. The pure play miner may produce the biggest return. It may also go to zero. The infrastructure provider may not give you the same explosive upside, but it has a much better chance of surviving the cycle. This is not an argument to avoid pure plays. It is an argument to size them properly. So we return to the question from the beginning. Are quantum stocks still good entry points today? The answer is maybe. That may sound unsatisfying, but in investing, honest uncertainty is more valuable than false precision. Anyone who tells you that all quantum stocks are obvious buys today is probably selling you emotion. Anyone who says the sector is dead because the stocks are volatile is probably missing the longer arc. The right answer depends on the company, the architecture, the valuation, the revenue, the cash runway, the dilution risk, and your own time horizon. It also depends on whether you have completed the look phase. If you have watched this sector carefully, you now know more than most people chasing the headlines. There are 4 architectures. You know which companies have revenue and which are mostly technology bets. You know which companies are established, which are new, and which are still coming to market. That infrastructure may matter as much as hardware. That some names have real traction and others have very serious risk that becomes your baseline. The next time a quantum stock moves violently, you will be able to ask whether it is noise or signal. That is the value of the look phase. But there is a psychological danger right now that I want to make explicit. 6 months ago, the fear around quantum was simple. People were afraid it would not work. They were afraid the science would take too long. They were afraid the companies would burn all their cash before commercialization arrived. They were afraid of being too early. Now the fear has changed. Now people are afraid that quantum will work and they will not own it. It is the same sector, the same uncertainty, the same risks, but the fear has flipped direction. That is one of the most important signals in markets. When the fear of loss turns into the fear of missing out, people often make the worst decisions. The fear that stopped them from buying near the bottom becomes the same fear that pushes them to buy near the top. It simply changes its costume. So if you feel that fear right now, pause. That does not mean sell. That does not mean buy. It means pause and inspect the decision. Ask the simple question, am I making a calibrated decision or am I trying to relieve an uncomfortable feeling? That question can save you a lot of money. And there is one more thing that has to be said clearly. Every one of these early-stage quantum companies is burning cash and issuing shares to stay alive. That is not a criticism. It is the nature of the stage, but it matters. Even if the stock price rises, your ownership can be diluted. Your slice of the pie can shrink while the company raises money to fund research, hardware development, hiring operations, and commercialization. In early-stage hardware, dilution is part of the game. If you ignore it, you are not investing. You are just watching the price. Therefore, the real question is not whether quantum is exciting. It obviously is. The real question is whether the expected payoff adjusted for dilution, execution risk, valuation, and time still makes sense. That is how I would think about sizing. If I had $100 allocated specifically to the quantum theme today, I would not put it all into the most exciting penny stock. I would not put it all into the largest pure play either. I would divide the exposure into layers. I would put about half into the infrastructure layer. That is the anchor. These are the companies that generate real cash flow today. They own cloud platforms, they own developer ecosystems, they own software platforms. They already have the balance sheets to survive. If the quantum timeline takes longer than expected, then I would put a meaningful portion into the pure play builders. These are the companies where quantum is the whole business. D-Wave, IonQ, Rigetti Inflection, Xanadu, and others in that category. This is where the outsized upside lives if commercialization accelerates over the next few years. It is also where the risks are much sharper. 6 months ago, I would have put a smaller portion there. Today, the public universe has expanded and some corrections have created better entry points than the hype peaks. That does not mean the pure plays are cheap. It means the opportunity set is broader and better defined. Then I would reserve a small portion for the very early, very speculative names, the microcaps, the quantum security names, the dreamers. These are the companies where a single breakthrough can multiply the value or where the entire position can disappear. That portion must be sized as such. If an investor cannot emotionally handle losing that speculative portion, then the portion is too large. This is why I always come back to principles. A great opportunity does not justify bad sizing. A revolutionary technology does not eliminate the need for risk control. A stock that went up 2,000% does not mean the next purchase is safe. Investing in emerging technology requires humility because the future does not unfold in a straight line. Quantum may be one of the most important computing shifts of the next decade. It may also take longer than investors expect. Some companies may become enormous, some may be acquired, some may dilute shareholders heavily, some may fail. You do not need to know the exact future to act intelligently. You need a framework. You need to know the architectures. You need to know the difference between revenue and promise. You need to know the difference between a platform and a press release. You need to know the importance of cash flow, contracts, manufacturing control, government relevance, and developer adoption. You also need to know yourself. If you are buying because you are afraid of missing out, you are not following a principle. You are following an impulse. If you are refusing to look because the sector feels too risky, you may be protecting yourself from volatility while exposing yourself to ignorance. The goal is not to chase. The goal is to understand, and once you understand, then you can decide whether the opportunity fits your system. That is how I would treat quantum today, not as a guaranteed path to wealth, not as a lottery ticket, not as a sector to ignore. I would treat it as a developing ecosystem that has moved from obscurity into recognition, and now requires more discipline, not less. The easy money was made by the people who saw the signal before the crowd did. The next money, if it comes, will be made by the people who can distinguish architecture from narrative, adoption from excitement, and allocation from gambling. That is the real lesson of the 2000% stock. The lesson is not that you should blindly buy the next quantum ticker. The lesson is that preparation matters before the world agrees with you. The woodshed matters before the performance. And in markets, the ability to think clearly before the crowd arrives is often where the largest rewards are created. But once the crowd has arrived, the principle changes. You do not stop looking. You simply stop rushing, you observe, you build the baseline, you wait for a signal that is better than what you have already seen. And when you act, you size it so that you can survive being wrong. That, to me, is how a rational investor approaches a very irrational-looking opportunity. Quantum may become one of the great wealth creation themes of the next decade. But the people who benefit most will not be the people who scream the loudest, chase the fastest, or believe every headline. They will be the people who understand the system, respect the risk, and keep enough discipline to let the opportunity come to them instead of forcing themselves into it at the worst possible moment. That is the difference between speculation and intelligent speculation. And in a sector like quantum, that difference may determine everything.